You wrote about how pride influenced geopolitics, leading eventually to World War I. How does it apply to today's situation?
Oh, I think it applies very much. I don't think human nature changes that much. Before the First World War, the leaders of a number of important countries felt that their country's honor was at stake, their pride was at stake. Today we get the same thing. People talk about prestige, they talk about credibility, but it means much the same thing. And so when President Trump says, "Make America great again," what he's really talking about is pride.
The Treaty of Versailles laid ground for an assertive and aggressive Germany. Does Russia have an argument for its assertive and aggressive posture today, given that no similar humiliation happened concluding the Cold War?
Well, I think countries never like losing. And Germany lost the First World War. That was a dreadful blow to German pride. And over time, a myth grew up that Germany hadn't really lost on the battlefield, that it had been stabbed in the back by people at home, people who'd gone on strike, people on the left. The Jews were blamed, and this helped, of course, to fuel anti-Semitism. What really went wrong in Germany was the impact of the Great Depression, which helped to fuel the rise of the Nazis. Now, was Russia badly treated at the end of the Cold War? Many Russians would say so. The fact is that, like Germany in the First World War, Russia actually lost. The Soviet Union, rather, lost. Was that the fault of the West? No. I think it was the fault of what was going on in the Soviet Union, and a number of the countries in the Soviet Union wanted to leave. But I do think the West could have been more generous with the Soviet Union and then with Russia. And I think there was too much talking down to Russia. Americans went and told them their system was totally wrong, their economy was totally wrong, everything they did was totally wrong. And I think they felt humiliated, and I think this helps to explain the rise of Russian nationalism.
Are the sanction regimes applied by the United Nations, the European Union and the US comparable in any aspect with Versailles?
Versailles was signed after a big naval blockade by the British, and it had a very harsh impact on Germany, and that blockade was lifted once the treaty had been signed. The sanctions on Russia, I think, are not as effective as they could be. One of the things that really needs to be done is for countries like Britain in particular, which has a lot of Russian money invested there, to begin to crack down on that and to begin to insist that the ownership of businesses, buildings and so on be made clear. And until the sanctions start getting at the people who are running Russia, the people who are in Putin's circle, who've benefited from being in that circle, the oligarchs who surround him, I don't think the sanctions are going to be all that effective.
Are we getting closer to a Weimar moment?
I think if you mean by Weimar moment a newly established constitutional democracy, a republic, which then falls to pieces and is preempted by right-wing nationalists, in this case, of course, the Nazis who destroy it. If you mean by that, I hope not. What the Depression of 1929 did was drive people to both the extremes of either the left wing, the Bolsheviks, or the right wing fascists of various kinds. And I think what the Depression also did was make a lot of people give up on both democracy and capitalism. What is, I think, very worrying now is we're seeing something rather the same that happened during the Great Depression, and that is people simply giving up on the institutions which they have, giving up on capitalism because it doesn't seem to be dealing with this ever-increasing gap between the rich and the poor. The inequalities in the system, I think, are now beginning to really have a political price. And I think that's one of the reasons you're seeing populist politicians being elected in places like Italy, here in Austria, and of course in the United States.
Austria, 100 years a republic. Quo vadis?
Part of what Austria has experienced over 100 years is what countries coming out of colonial empires have experienced, trying to figure out who they are and what their characteristics are. I mean, my own country, Canada, has been through the same sort of thing. We're a little bit older than Austria, actually, but we still wonder. Since the Second World War, I think I've seen much more of a real Austrian identity developing. I mean, I don't get any sense now that people in Austria feel that they're part of a greater German nation, that they seem to be very content with their own identity. You seem to be managing to have coalition governments which show some of the signs of populism, but not perhaps going down the same road that your neighbor Hungary is going down. So let us hope that the experience of being a constitutional democracy, a republic, is now deeply rooted enough that Austria will manage to encompass some of these discontents and divisions and keep moving along. It's got so much going for it after all.